Hello friends. This is Phoenix What If. How are you all? So in this video, we will see. What if Ichigo is adopted by Mugetsu and blessed with the power of ancient god? But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also if possible share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. 10 years. It had been 10 years since that day. That fateful day that he had won. 10 years since Kurosaki Ichigo had beaten Aizen. 10 years since he had saved everyone. 10 years since he had gained the awesome powers capable of fighting Aizen. Capable of beating Aizen. Capable of killing Aizen. It had been 10 years since Kurosaki Ichigo had lost all of his powers. All of his powers of a Shinigami, of a hollow, of everything. Ichigo Kurosaki was useless, he was pathetic, and he was powerless. Hell, he couldn't even see any form of spirit anymore. Shinigamis? No. Hollows? No. Pluses? Hell no. Kurosaki Ichigo was absolutely 100% useless. Of course all of his friends that hadn't abandoned him always told him that he wasn't useless, that he was and still will always be their protector. Ichigo sighed and rubbed his eyes in frustration. It's best that I don't go down that train of thought anymore. It's for the best. He mused to himself sadly. Ichigo was incredibly frustrated beyond absolute belief. Even after 10 years his heart was still unable to comprehend why they had left him. Why had Soul Society left him so hung and dry? At first Ichigo assumed that after a few months his friends from the afterlife would come visit him in their gigais made by Urahara, but they just didn't. There was no other way to put it, they just didn't turn up. Did they not care for him? They'd just throw him at Aizen and let him swing away with Zangetsu, and if he wins, just toss him away like yesterday's garbage. Was that what they were doing to him? Because it certainly seemed like it. Bastards, Ichigo muttered sardonically to himself. But that wasn't the worst thing, oh no. What the worst thing was the fact that even after 10 years he still hadn't recovered even a minuscule amount of Ryotsu. It was just so damn frustrating not being able to help his friends defend Karakura town from any leftover hollows from the war. Now being at the age of 26, Ichigo Kurosaki had become something of hermit of society. He even moved out of his family home around 9 years ago in a rush and had moved towards the one place where he had beaten Aizen, the hill just outside of Karakura town, the hill with the gaping canyon within it. It certainly didn't escape Ichigo how ironic the fact that the one place where Ichigo felt safe from abandonment was the most dangerous place he had ever been to before. Ichigo snorted somewhat. Yep. Irony is certainly the one thing I always look for when I am looking for a place to live, and it actually was in a roundabout sort of way. Because of the fact that this was the place where he had beaten Aizen, everyone who ever looked for him never even considered to look here. The most dangerous place where he had been in his short time as a Shinigami. Irony is awesome in that weird sort of way, I suppose, Ichigo considered within his mind. Although building his own wooden house on the hill wasn't enough, his friends could still recognize him on his few trips into Karakura town when he needed to get the essentials. He couldn't have that. He needed to get rid of everything that could remind him of his past life. So he let his hair grow over the 9 years he had left. He let it grow to a ridiculously long length, and since he always hated having long hair, no one would suspect him because everyone would be looking for someone with short hair. His hair looked like his hollows when they fought within the Dongai. Although orange hair, no matter how long, is pretty damn recognizable. So that's why instead of Ichigo having uncomfortable long orange hair, he now had uncomfortably long dyed black hair. And considering how much hair he had defiantly gone through quite a lot of hair dye packs. Yay. Ichigo wasn't happy at how much all those packs cost. His hair reached down to the middle of his back, however it only reached just above his eyes on his front. The fact was that it was still incredibly uncomfortable to live. But if it alleviated and suspicious as to who he was, he would grin and bear it. He couldn't risk being found out, not after what happened last time. I just can't risk it all over again. He still visited Karakura town now and again, only to get some groceries and visit his favorite cafe across from Urahara's Shoten. Ichigo always told himself this was to keep an eye upon Urahara in case he was up to anything that could before risk the whole of the world. But the truth was that Ichigo simply didn't trust Urahara. Not anymore anyway. And that's where we find Ichigo Kurosaki, sitting at a table in his favorite cafe, cradling a cup of herbal tea in his cold hands. With it being halfway through November, it was kind of expected. And considering the temperature was -1 degrees, Ichigo could be forgiven for being cold. Ichigo takes a sip of his warm beverage, sighing in ecstasy from the warm herbal liquid running down his throat and warming his whole body. Oh, that's the bloody stuff. I love this stuff, Ichigo mused to himself. Why hello there, cutie. What are you doing here before me today? Questioned a familiar voice to Ichigo's inner delight. Turning his head to his right, Ichigo smiled as a familiar chocolate-brown face smirking at him. Ichigo sighed. Hello Yoruichi-san. Such a pleasure to make your acquaintance once again. The now named Yoruichi smiled back as she lowered herself into the seat across the table from Ichigo. He scratched his dyed black scruffy beard. What would you like today? He questioned. Oh, I'm hurt. All this time and you still don't know what I have to drink here? Ichigo couldn't help the grin that crept its way onto his face. Okay, hot chocolate with extra milk and cream it is. As Ichigo flagged down a waiter and asked for the warm drink for Yoruichi. As this happened, her face became a slight frown and Ichigo noticed this occurrence. What's wrong, Yoruichi-san? Oh, nothing, she replied. I'm just wondering if you're going to tell me your name today. Ichigo groaned as he placed his tea gently back onto its saucer. He rubbed his forehead in frustration. However, a certain feline woman wasn't going to relent today. Oh, come on. Please, I gave you my name. Please, please, please. Ichigo groaned again and folded his arms in annoyance of the current pestering, a scowl slowly forming upon his face. However, as soon as he saw her pout, he relented without opposition and a small smile played across his lips. Call me Mugetsu if you must. Ichigo smirked. That was a good name with no obvious connections to him. Well, obvious connection that everybody but me doesn't know. Ichigo expected a lot of things from disclosing his supposed name. What he didn't expect was for Yoruichi's eyes to have practically light up in happiness. Very well then. Mugetsu-san, it's a pleasure to finally know your name. Oh, believe me. The pleasure is all mine. Yoruichi smirked like a Cheshire cat at that comment. Oh, I believe that's quite true, if I do say so myself. Oh, you do? Do you? Ichigo asked cheekily, a grin plastered across his face. Yoruichi leaned slightly across the table and a flirtatious smile played across her chocolate-brown face. Ichigo smiled. My Yoruichi-san, you're being quite flirtatious today, aren't you? Yoruichi only giggled slightly as she began to lean further and was almost face to face, but the waiter came forward with the hot chocolate. A cute blush playing upon her cheeks as she cleared her throat and placed down the cup. Yoruichi chuckles slightly and returns to her seat, silently picking up the warm beverage and takes a sip, never taking her gaze from Ichigo. Ichigo simply smiled as he finished his herbal tea and pulled a notebook out of his faded jeans right pocket along with a pen from his left. He then starts to write within the notebook. Yoruichi raises a delicate purple eyebrow at this. Whatcha doing there, Mu-san? Ichigo raised a dyed black eyebrow in response to that. Mu-san? He questioned curiously. Do you prefer a different name perhaps? No, no. Mu-san is just fine. Yo-san? Yoruichi grinned cheekily at that comment. And in response to your earlier question, I am simply making notes for my new book. Yoruichi looked slightly puzzled at this information and Ichigo's smirk grew in response. What? You expected me to do something else perhaps? Yoruichi quickly shook her head to signify she meant no offense. Thankfully, Ichigo waved his hand slightly as he took no offense for the remark at all. So, what's your book about? Well, to be honest, it's more of a graphic novel than a book. Yoruichi's left eyebrow raised ever so slightly. Oh. What's it about? Ichigo scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Which is harder than you'd think thanks to this ridiculous hair. It's about a young boy who gains the powers of a Shinigami and uses those powers to protect the ones he loves. The instant those words left Ichigo's mouth, he knew he could have been in trouble from the slightly narrowed look Yoruichi gave him from across the table. Well done, you dumbass, Ichigo insulted himself mentally. It's really good. The protagonist is a 12-year-old boy with long red hair. Ichigo started to sweat slightly, however he almost couldn't stop a sigh of relief escape his lips when Yoruichi's narrowed gaze disappeared. What's it called? She asked innocently. Ichigo inwardly smiled. He liked these little talks with Yoruichi even if she didn't know that it was actually Ichigo she was talking to. She made his usual scowling expression into something a little more cheerful. Too bad I can't let her know that it's actually me. I can't risk my family finding out. I don't deserve. Not anymore. A somber expression found its way onto Ichigo's face as he recalled what could be considered the worst day in his life. Flashback. 9 years ago at Ichigo's family home. It had been a full year since he had beaten Aizen, a full year since Soul Society had abandoned him. He was currently within his home with his family. His dad was out taking care of something. Whatever that something was, so he was left with looking after his 2 sisters on this fine Saturday afternoon. Getting up from his bed after a few minutes of relaxation, he meandered downstairs into the living room to see his 2 younger sisters sat at the couch debating onto what to watch. Sighing, he plopped himself in between the two, snatching the remote from Karen's hand as he changed the channel to what he wanted to watch. "Ichi-ne," complained Karen as she lunged at her older brother in an attempt at retrieving the remote from his clutches as he held it high above her head. A smirk found its way slowly on Ichigo's usual somber face. Yuzu noticed this as she giggled cutely at the sight of her twin sister attempting to get the remote back. "Oni-chan." Yuzu squealed as she jumped at Ichigo in sync with Karen. Ichigo laughed heartily as he held off both attackers from the remote. His eyes shined with happiness as he remembers why he had fought in the first place. Maybe I can live like this from now on. No fighting. No death, just a relaxing life with my family," he thought to himself happily. Too bad Ichigo was going to eat those words in the next second. Smash, flashback end. Datsu. Mugetsu-san. Ichigo was broken from his thoughts as Yoruichi's voice reached him. "Mugetsu? Are you okay?" Yay, I'm fine. What was your question?" Ichigo shook his head to clear his thoughts. "I asked you what the name of your novel was." Ichigo mused out loud for a second until his face adopted a grin. "My graphic novel's name is Bleach." "Bleach?" she asked, both of her delicate eyebrows rose. Ichigo scratched the back of his head sheepishly. "What I would do for some herbal tea right now, or coffee, or any drink for that matter. Oh God. I am so tired right now." Ichigo, Mugetsu ed within his muddled head. As he stumbled out of his simple single bed in his simple wooden shack. Ichigo chuckled somewhat at that. Who would have thought that such simplicity would be the most comfiest for me? He rubbed his eyes in a futile attempt at clearing his head from the weary feeling of tiredness on this bleary Thursday morning. He stumbled his way into his bathroom. Ouch. Not without bumping into the doorway accidentally. Ichigo fumbled to his sink and turned the tap on. He lowered his head and dunked it underneath the ice-cold water streaming from the tap, hoping to God that this cleared up his head from tiredness. Holy crap. Yep, it woke Ichigo up good and proper. Grumbling to himself, Ichigo grabbed a towel from the rack beside and began the arduous task of towel-drying his hair. It was easy when I had short hair, but this is just one of the annoyances that I must endure since I'm still hiding my presence from everyone. After the 10-minute process of drying his dyed hair, which thankfully could survive washes, Ichigo threw the towel into the basket next to his toilet and returned his gaze back to the mirror above the sink. Once his eyes reached the mirror, they widened dramatically. Ichigo's permanent existent scowl wasn't present in the reflection that greeted him. In fact, nothing within the mirror actually reflected anything that looked slightly like who was looking into it. Because the reflection that was staring back at Ichigo wasn't Ichigo. It was his fully hollowed form that was staring back at him through the mirror. Ichigo stood, completely stunned at what he saw. He couldn't believe his eyes. He refused to believe his eyes. What he saw wasn't possible. He lost his hollow powers. There was no way that this could be real. Yet, try as he might, Ichigo just could not wring himself to look at his hands, to confirm his thoughts, the nagging feeling of what it's true preventing him due to the fear of what would come if he was in fact hollowed. The thought utterly terrified poor Ichigo, who couldn't even breathe now as he stared straight into the eyes of his hollowed counterpart, his pupils diluted at what he saw within his counterpart's eyes. Only one word could sum up what he was currently seeing within those blackened eyes. Death. The death of him, the death of all of his friends, the death of his family, and what made his heart cringe with worry with the death of Yoruichi. He couldn't even start to wonder why the thought of Yoruichi in peril was the most concerning thing he saw. He was still pretty bust, having a mental breakdown. However, his hollowed, mirrored counterpart felt the need to add more insanity fuel to the already crumbling wooden house by opening its frightening jaw. "I am you, and you are me. We are both the same person." Its demonic yet calm voice sent shivers through Ichigo's entire body as he attempted to reply to the mirror. "No, you're wrong. It's all your fault. All your fault. Shut up. But it's okay. You enjoyed it. You enjoyed it when you saw them die, and you will enjoy it again. What? Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I meant I enjoyed watching them die, and I will enjoy watching them die again. No, this can't be real. It can't be. It's real me. All of those things, those deaths that you just had the pleasure of watching, they're all going to come true. Ichigo felt his mind crumbling at this moment. All of his mental defensive walls were just being utterly shattered by his hollowed counterpart's voice. That's not all. These deaths that I just saw all seem to be seen in a first-person perspective. I'm sure you can connect the dots from all of these hints that I've thrown at ya. No. The hollowed Ichigo cackled madly. Yes. I did it. You did it. Whatever way of reference floats your boat. The fact remains that you killed them all. You murdered all of your friends, and your family, even our precious Yoruichi. All of them, dead. Ichigo whimpered. There was no point in fighting it. His mind was practically switched off at this point. All he could do was take the verbal torment and live in anguish with it. And you know what the best thing is? When you killed Yoruichi, she begged. Oh boy, did she beg for her pretty little life. She begged for us to realize our mistake and come to our senses. Thinking that we were mentally insane and simply going on a murderous rampage, the hollow paused and seemingly leaned closer to Ichigo. Even though Ichigo hadn't moved an inch in front of the mirror. Don't break down yet, that was just the warming up to the best part. You see, all of these murders of our doing weren't done in insanity or revenge or some sick and twisted form of protection from other people. No, it was none of them. It was the simple fact that when we received our powers back, we felt the need to show off, shall we say? Ichigo chalked on thin air, as he crumbled to the floor, rocking back and forth. T couldn't be true. It can't be true. He couldn't let it be true. And that's when Ichigo woke up. No! He shouted as he leapt from his bed and assumed a fighting stance in his bedroom, looking around frantically, for any form of danger towards him. When he saw none, he sighed and lowered his tense for slightly. Ichigo's mind wandered to that dream. No. Nightmare, and he could only think of one thing. Well, that sure as hell escalated pretty bloody quickly. I should probably try to figure out what that strange nightmare was, but first, I need some herbal tea. Good to know that Ichigo had his priorities straight. However, Ichigo's mighty quest for his herbal tea was halted by a knocking at the door. Rubbing his eyes, Ichigo slowly stumbled from his bedroom, steering very clear of the bathroom, and stood in front of his door. Bracing himself, he opened the door. If you're here to tell me the story of Jesus Christ, you can foo. Ichigo's eyes widened at who was standing in front of him, and the person in front of caused his face to adopt something that was practically foreign to his usually scowling face. I believe they call it a genuine smile, if I can remember rightly. Ichigo chuckled within his head at that joke to himself. However, the use of this genuine smile was no laughing matter, because standing in front of him was Yoruichi, the only person he still had any contact with. Even if she doesn't know about who I really am, she is the only person who talks to me, although most of that could be pointed to the fact that I actually make no effort in meeting new people these days. Ichigo grumbled slightly at that thought. Well, hello there, Mu-san, says Yoruichi, who waves at Ichigo in amusement at him just standing in the doorway. Ichigo shook his head slightly in embarrassment at being caught whilst he was pondering. Oh hey, Yo-san, what are you doing here? Ichigo asked, curious as to why the cheeky cat-like woman was outside his home. At this question, Yoruichi adopted a nervous smirk as she placed her hands behind her head and tilted her head to the left slightly. Well, I was just in the neighborhood and I thought that I might as well as knock onto my good friend's house and see how he was doing. Nothing wrong with that, is there? Yoruichi, you do realize that I live on top of a hill. There is no neighborhood up here. Yoruichi chuckled sheepishly as she shoved her hands in her pockets of the ripped black jeans she was currently sporting. Look, are you going to invite me in, or are you just going to keep staring at me? That depends. Yoruichi's eyebrows raised curiously. Depends on what? Whether or not I'm allowed to stare. Yoruichi grinned at that little joke as she leaned forward slightly, her face adopting a sultry look. The look unnerved Ichigo, who didn't understand this advance. A reddish hue appeared on his cheeks as he lowered his head and mumbled for the flash goddess to come into his abode. Yoruichi chuckled as she walked through the doorway, into Ichigo's home. Ichigo stood still for a moment, his mind going over what in the world has just happened. Why was Yoruichi coming into his home? Why did he let her in? And most importantly, why in Soul Society was she knocking on his door in the first place? All of these questions that Ichigo had running through his mind would have to wait for the moment. Ichigo had a guest, and he had to be a good host. Ichigo smiled and closed his door, following Yoruichi, who had found her way into his living room. Ichigo made his way into his living room to see Yoruichi comfortably sat on his couch, her feet tucked underneath her body as she huddled into the ledge of the couch. Ichigo walked across the room and seated himself in his personal single chair, which was adjacent to the couch. "Take a seat," he said sardonically. Yoruichi giggled. "Don't mind if I do, Mew-san," Yoruichi teased, a grin upon her lips as she snuggled even deeper into his couch, almost mocking Ichigo in a way. Whilst Yoruichi burrowed even deeper into his couch, Ichigo took this moment to admire what she was wearing, and he came to a conclusion that she wasn't wearing her usual orange top with black tights. Today she was wearing an orange blouse which reached her knees and the faded ripped black jeans that Ichigo noticed before. "She looks beautiful. She should wear clothes that aren't training clothes more often. They suit her perfectly." Ichigo's thoughts were sudden and surprising, but they weren't unwelcome, which confused Ichigo. He hadn't cared what Yoruichi looked like beforehand. She was just his mentor and a good friend who helped him gain the power to save Ruika when he was just a little Shinigami in a big bad Shinigami world. He never thought clothes could make someone even more beautiful. He never even paid any mind to these sorts of things. "It's not really my fault. I was a bit too busy saving the world and the afterlife at the time when I first met Yoruichi." Ichigo decided that he had spent too much time thinking about menial things when the person of his thoughts was right in front of him. Thankfully Yoruichi hadn't noticed Ichigo's unfocused stare because she was bust-gazing around the room, seeming to look at all of the objects within his living room. At this point, Ichigo realized his main dilemma. He had no idea on how to treat a guest or how to be a good host. Back when he was known as Ichigo to people, he never invited people round, because of his father and his crazy antics, scared of creeping out his guest because of his overactive dad. However, during Ichigo's mental crisis he remembered something his dad had said to him a long time ago, back when he was just a boy. Flashback. "Now remember, my son, if you ever find yourself in the presence of a beautiful lady who is your guest in your own home, always remember to ask if they want a drink first. That question is what we call the icebreaker, and it has saved our hides more times than most men would like to count." Ishin leaned down and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. Overly dramatized tears were present in his eyes as his bottom lip whimpered. "Promise me, son. Promise me that you will ask this question, because if you do, you'd make Daddy the happiest man alive." Ishin's eyes glazed with fatherly pride as he looked at his son, admiring at what a catch he would be when he grew up. Ichigo looked up into his father's eyes. "That's great, Dad, but can I go now? I'm going to be late for my first day at primary school." Flashback, and Ichigo could scarcely believe it, but he was actually going to use his father's advice for once in his life. So, Ichigo swallowed a lump in his throat, suddenly wondering where this nervousness came from. "So what?" asked Yoruichi slyly as her eyes met Ichigo's. Ichigo's insides bullied. He knew what she was doing. She was playing with him. She could easily tell that he was nervous, and just like Ichigo knew her, she capitalized upon this sudden nervousness like a hungry cat who just found its next prey. Ichigo had to chuckle at such a good metaphor that was for Yoruichi. However, there was no time to chuckle about the jokes he makes within his head because the cat had just found its prey. "Would you like a drink?" Yoruichi nodded as she continued to open her mouth to start the teasing, but Ichigo was already out of the room, his long flowing black hair trailing behind him. In the kitchen, Ichigo swore he could hear Yoruichi's laughter coming from the living room, but he shrugged it off and then went on to make a hot chocolate with extra milk for his guest and some herbal tea for himself. During this process, Ichigo let his mind wander, and not always for the best as it turns out. Today was one of those bad times as Ichigo's mind went back to that fateful day everything changed for the worse. Flashback. 9 years ago. Ichigo's family house. Ichigo laughed heartily as he held off both attackers from the remote. His eyes shined with happiness as he remembers why he had fought in the first place. Maybe I can live like this from now on. No fighting. No death, just a relaxing life with my family, he thought to himself happily. Too bad Ichigo was going to eat those words in the next second. Smash! Oni-chan! Screamed Yuzu as Ichigo instinctively covered both his little sisters from the falling debris of what used to be the roof of the Kurosaki family clinic. Ichigo was beyond pissed. Whoever had done this was going to die a slow and painful death. How dare they threaten his two younger sister? Oh yes, they would pay. Making sure all of the debris had fell, Ichigo slowly uncurled himself from over his siblings and looked towards where the roof had caved in and saw nothing. He didn't see anything, just a hole in the roof which he was pissed about. What? Ichigo mumbled before he was smashed into the plasma screen TV by an unseen force. Briefly the thought crossed his mind that this was an enemy that could turn invisible and attack people, maybe a new high-tech gear made by the army or something like that. Hey! Hollow! Leave Ichi-ne alone! Shouted Karen as she charged at seemingly nothing. Nope, it's a hollow. Of course it's a hollow. Karen, stop. It was too late. The hollow had grabbed Karen and threw her into a wall, although to Ichigo it just looked like a creepy puppet show. But that wasn't important at the moment. Ichigo forced himself up, even with his mind turned to jelly from the concussion he surely just gained from the throw. He looked at where Karen had been thrown from in charge. Uncaring about what happened to him, he just wanted to make sure his sisters were safe. And if that meant sacrificing himself so his dad or someone else could make it in time, he'd gladly do it without hesitation. A roar ripped out of his throat as he ran at seemingly thin air. Fully expecting that he was going to die. I'm going to kill you for hurting my sister. Ichigo no. Flashback end whistling broke Ichigo from his trip down unwanted memory lane. Ichigo turned to the origin of the noise and saw that it was his kettle, informing that the water was now boiled. Ichigo quickly poured the water into the cups and attempted to forget everything he had just remembered to no avail. He sighed, at least he could still have a great time with Yoruichi. And you know what? He was right. Ichigo and Yoruichi chatted happily for seemingly hours about practically nothing, they were just enjoying each other's company. And throughout the whole conversation, Ichigo didn't have one single thought about his identity, his family, his lost powers or the horrific nightmare from the mooring. Nope, throughout that whole day, Ichigo felt nothing but peace and happiness. And it was all because of Yoruichi. Damn, I should invite her over more. Right, I now officially hate my life. Those were the rather morbid thoughts running through Ichigo Kurosaki's mind at this time. Why, you might ask? Well, there is a good reason for this. At this moment Ichigo or Mugetsu was being dragged through the streets of Karakura town in the mid-afternoon by none other than everyone's favorite cat-like woman, Yoruichi Shihuan. Now Ichigo was still trying to comprehend how he actually ended up in this certain situation. Flashback Ichigo had just finished from shopping for needed groceries, shopping bags in hands. He started his trek up the hill to his wooden house to drop off his groceries and maybe getting some needed sleep. Ichigo chuckled to himself. When the hell did I become an old man who needs an afternoon nap? He muttered to himself as he continued to trudge up the hill, his arms starting to ache from the vast amount of shopping he had bought. He grunted slightly as his eyes quickly shifted from the rocky ground below his feet and his straining shopping bags. Ichigo's eyes narrowed as he noticed this as his ire grew exponentially. Don't you dare. Don't you bloody dare, you recycled piece of plastic. If you rip, then I swear to whatever robotic master that spawned you that I will burn your remains on a stake if you rip. The sad fact that being a social hermit and having only a beautiful brown-skinned woman and a black cat with golden eyes to talk to can have certain problems following it, who could have guessed? For starters, because of the large amount of time Ichigo spent by himself, he developed the unhealthy habit of talking to either himself or inanimate objects. You have to find companionship from somewhere, even if that somewhere is yourself. Ichigo wasn't insane, his companion assures him of that. The irony wasn't lost on Ichigo at that idea. Ichigo was now 3/4 up the hill and he could see the ridge that was the top of the hill. He was so close now, his bags just needed to survive for a couple of more minutes. Repeat. God damn it. The bags had ripped and all of Ichigo's shopping poured onto the rocky footing below. Ichigo grabbed his hair in frustration as he attempted to calm himself down from this bad luck. He sighed as he stuffed the ripped bags into his trench coat's pockets, still grumbling incoherently to himself as his mind went over ways as to fix this unfortunate situation that he now found himself in. Ah, mother fu. Giggling stopped Ichigo's rant as he looked towards where said giggling was originating from. Ichigo's spirits rose as he saw it to be the beautiful brown-skinned woman that he was just thinking of. I see you're having some problems at the moment, Mu-san. The smirk on Yoruichi's face didn't really help Ichigo's current predicament, in fact it soured his mood even more. Acting slightly petulant, he turned away from Yoruichi in a huff, thus causing even more giggling to come from Yoruichi's mouth. Yay, yay. Keep laughing, just see what happens, Yo-san. Ichigo grumbled at her as he attempted to gather all of his dropped shopping, hoping that the fall hadn't ruined any of them in any way. Yoruichi watched in slight pity as Ichigo, Mugetsu scrambled on the ground for all of his shopping, and she felt for him. Even for someone with her stamina and fitness, the hill of which Mugetsu lived always caused sweat to form on her brow, and she was a Shinigami for Pete's sake. She could only imagine how tiring the climb was to her human friend. Oh, for God's sake! Shouted Ichigo as he stood back up and booted a ripped packet of noodles in frustration. Are you okay, Mu-san? Yoruichi asked her friend worriedly. Something such as this wouldn't usually annoy her friend as much as it seems to be doing. Feeling even more worry for her black-hired friend, she reached out and tapped his shoulder, aiming to get his attention. Ichigo rounded on her and she had to take a step back in shock. She had just now noticed how bad he looked. He had huge bags under his eyes where he must have not been getting enough sleep. His usually well-kept long black hair was now in shambles. Bangs of hair strewn everywhere. Even some of the hair in the front, which was usually kept above his eyes neatly, now had bangs obscuring his eyes from view as if they were attempting to hide the bags underneath his eyes. Yoruichi's worry for her friend rose suddenly as she wondered over why Mugetsu looked such a state. I'm fine, Yo-san. Now if there is nothing else you need from me, I'm going to try and save my shopping. And at that Ichigo returned to trying to save his groceries. Yoruichi's heart went out to him as Ichigo lowered his body again and root through his fallen shopping, looking for any shopping that hadn't ripped, broken or cracked. Yoruichi stood there for a while, just watching as her mind went over ways to resolve this problem that befell her seemingly sleep-deprived friend. In a moment that could be considered incredibly cliché, and if Ichigo saw it, he would have called it dumb, Yoruichi ceded her fingers as inspiration struck her like a bolt of lightning. Reaching down to the still grumbling form of Mugetsu, she gripped his hand and lifted him up to his feet, not waiting to let him ask what she was doing. She already started dragging him down the hill and Ichigo was powerless to stop her. All he could do was question hers and his sanity at the moment. Flashback end, and that's why we find our befuddled hero being dragged through the streets of Karakura town. Testing his luck, Ichigo attempted to ask where they were going again. Yo-san. Where are we going again? I really hope this isn't a kidnapping, albeit a rather strange kidnapping, but a kidnapping nonetheless. Ichigo struggled to keep up with the woman who still had a firm grasp onto his hand and not fall over and end up being dragged across the floor, because knowing Yoruichi as he did, she wouldn't even notice him fall. Yoruichi's head turned back to look at Ichigo. Where do you think we're going? Like I said, I hope this isn't a strange form of kidnapping. Laughter was her response as she dragged Ichigo into the market street, and suddenly, what they were going to be doing became very clear to him. We're going shopping? Ichigo asked to hopefully confirm his suspicions. Of course we are, silly. What else are friends for? Yoruichi's gaze turned to Ichigo mid-stride as she flashed a smile in his direction that caused his breath to hitch in his throat as she continued to drag him to Lord only knows where. Her gaze returned to the street. Ichigo didn't understand what was happening at all. He realized that Yoruichi had just suddenly decided to drag him shopping. As to why this was unknown to him, and considering his last experience with shopping didn't end too well, he couldn't see how taking him shopping was what friends do. However, Ichigo decided to try and enjoy this. Hopefully this could be fun and relieve Ichigo of any stress he had built up. Because he had built up a hell of a lot of stress since the horrid nightmare of his hollow last week. Each time he went to sleep, that same nightmare struck him. It assaulted his senses whilst he slept, and he was powerless to do anything against it. Each night he lost more sleep. Just last night, Ichigo only gained 3 hours sleep. That was an hour less than yesterday. And it showed. Oh boy, did it show. He was irritated easily. He barely ate anything since, scared that images of the nightmare might suddenly appear and make him throw up his food from how gruesome they were. There was also something else that Ichigo is doing since these nightmares were affecting him, and that was the fact that he was avoiding Yoruichi, and he became even more of a hermit, not even going to the little cafe across from the Urahara Shoten. Ichigo knew he was going to regret asking, but he had to know. What are we going shopping for? Oh, you know, this and that. Ichigo just knew that this was punishment for avoiding her all week, and the cheeky smirk she sent his was pretty much confirmed this, and Ichigo was okay with this. He really wasn't that bothered. In fact, he was pretty flattered from the fact that someone cared enough about him to actually drag him about in an attempt to rid him of his dark thoughts. They had stopped in front of a clothes store, the words, "Koyaki's clothes for everyone," and Ichigo couldn't stop the snide remark that this place sold clothes that had that blasted, infernal rabbit was emblazoned on the front of some of their dresses and shirts, and he found that out the hard way when Rukia had dragged him around the market one day. He had a scowl so bad that day. Ichigo didn't acknowledge the fact that he was already enjoying himself more with Yoruichi than when he was with Rukia, and they hadn't even entered the bloody store yet. Yoruichi nudged Ichigo and broke him from his daydreaming and indicated towards the shop entrance. Ichigo sighed and they both walked in. Neither realized or chose not to acknowledge it, but both of them were still holding hands. Within the shop, the cute couple, as the shop attendant referred to them, to the utter embarrassment of Ichigo and amusement from Yoruichi. Anyway, the cute couple went to the dress section of the shop, and Yoruichi had Ichigo sit down on a stool like a good little puppy as she went and tried on different dresses. Throughout that unique experience, Ichigo found himself being the judge of Yoruichi's looks, as every time she came out a new dress, she'd cast her eyes upon Ichigo, waiting for his opinion. And although Ichigo would never admit it to himself, but even though Ichigo always said that she looked pretty good, in a gruff manner, each new dress that she wore made her look even more beautiful than the other. Oh, and that black dress, it sent shivers down Ichigo's spine. It was about halfway through the dress expedition when Yoruichi came out wearing a black silk, ankle-length dress with a shoulder strap, going over her right shoulder. But that wasn't the best thing. No, the best thing was the slit in the dress that revealed a lot of Yoruichi's right leg. The dress was perfect for her. It was simple yet elegant, why yet innocent. To Ichigo it just screamed Yoruichi. Too bad that Yoruichi wasn't buying anything. Ichigo sighed as he stood up as Yoruichi finished placing the last dress back on its hanger. Yoruichi said they were going to go to the organic market after this. Ichigo nodded as he walked after her, retreating, when suddenly a thought entered his mind. "You go on. I'll catch up in a sec." He waved off Yoruichi's insistence that she could wait for him, and she went to the organic shop. Ichigo smirked as he looked around before he brought out his wallet. Yoruichi wasn't sure what she thought of Mugetsu. She really liked him as a friend and enjoyed spending her time with him. Most of her time, in fact. The week that Yoruichi realized that she hadn't seen Mugetsu for that long was really dull and uneventful, and as everyone who knew Yoruichi knew that she hated dull and uneventful. And that's why she was now in the organic shop, looking at all of the different types of herbal tea. Although Yoruichi was surprised when she saw Mugetsu raging at his spilt shopping, and her heart clenched at not seeing him for a week and for seeing him in anger. Yoruichi had felt that way before, and it didn't end well for her. At that moment she seriously considered just walking away and not talking to him for a while, but something stopped her. She wanted to feel that way. She wanted to feel for someone, to care for someone. It had been so long since she emotionally cared for anyone the way she had stated to care for Mugetsu. Of course she realized the fact that her being a Shinigami and him being human would cause some problems, and there would be a lot of explanations needed, but Yoruichi allowed a grin to form on her face as she picked the peppermint flavor to buy. If Mugetsu still accepted her when she told him about herself, then she most likely would be the happiest person ever. A frown then formed as she paid for the tea. But if he runs away, I don't think I could take it all over again, the pain. Yoruichi had just walked out of the shop. Her mood soured somewhat, however it rose instantly once she saw the person of her thoughts come out of the clothes store and start to stroll towards her. Her eyebrows rose at the sight of the bag in his hands. "He bought something? Yo-san, you didn't have to get me herbal tea, I have lots stocked up at my house." "Oh, I know, this tea is for me," Yoruichi said finally. Ichigo just looked dumbfounded at her, and Yoruichi decided to elaborate. "This herbal tea is coming with me back to the Shoten where I live, and I'm taking you as well." Happy smile on Yoruichi's face stopped the harsh remark that was coming from Ichigo's mouth. Instead, he simply sighed and slumped his shoulders. "So I was right about the strange kidnapping?" "Yep." Yoruichi nodded and then once again grabbed Ichigo's hand and dragged him in the direction of the Shoten, Ichigo flailing behind her as he attempted fix his walking. He couldn't hide the small smile on his face as he admired Yoruichi. She didn't even ask what was in my bag. Hey Mew-san, how's the book coming along? It's actually a graphic novel, Ichigo grumbled in response. Giggling was his reply, and Ichigo couldn't stop the smirk coming to his face. Well, to be honest, the graphic novel, Ichigo paused. He hadn't touched the novel since the nightmares started, and suddenly he wanted to continue it. He briefly wondered why until Yoruichi broke him from his thoughts. Well, the smirk on his face grew. It's getting there. Ichigo grumbled as he looked over all of his paper laid out before him on his writing desk. He was currently in the process of drawing some of the characters of his graphic novel, attempting to picture how each of his characters would look like. And that's where we find Ichigo's current predicament. He wasn't able to determine how his characters should look like in this graphic novel. It was infuriating. He had managed to get the plot down. He had all of the story parts thought out and jotted down in his notebook. But the actual visual characters that he needed to draw for his story, they eluded his thoughts, always just outside of his reach. He had designed the main character of the story. He was a character who had a striking resemblance to Ichigo 10 years prior, before he dyed his hair and grew it out. This character had white hair instead of orange, just like Ichigo's younger form, and always seemed to have a permanent scowl on his face. Just like myself when I was younger, it seems, Ichigo thought to himself. Ichigo didn't understand why the idea of making the hero of his novel like himself when he was younger seemed to appeal to him, but it seemed like the right idea for the character to him. He wouldn't be overly happy, annoying everyone around him. He wouldn't be too smart, so he wouldn't make anyone feel inadequate with their intelligence. He didn't want to make the character too angry, otherwise people wouldn't like to associate with him. It was all such a delicate balance, so the character that he had envisioned would feel and act alive within the graphic novel. The character would be like him when he was younger. He would brood, but ultimately he would care for those around him even if he didn't outwardly show it. Just like him when he was younger, caring, brave, heroic. Incredibly naive, Ichigo had to groan as his thoughts attempted to revisit the DOS of his past. He lightly slapped his cheeks to shake him from his memories. He didn't need that. What he needed was to simply move on and be happy that everyone he cares for was finally safe and sound. All he had to do was forget all about his past life and live in content within his comfortable hand-built cabin. Then why do you always think of her? Think of who? You know, I can't help it, she's just always there. You could always just avoid her. I can't do that, can't or won't. You know what you have to do. You have to make a choice. Do you shut yourself in and avoid everyone including her? Making it that you forget all about the past and look towards the future? Stop. Or do you accept the fact that you can't live without her in your life and let her into your life? No, just shut up. You know you have to choose. No. Choose. I can't. Choose. Why? Choose. Ichigo jerked up from his desk as his eyes opened, coughing slightly as he checked where he was. He was relieved to see that he had just fallen asleep on his desk. However, he frowned when he saw that he had drooled during his impromptu sleep and that his drool had dropped onto his artwork. Ichigo sighed as he went through the process of wiping the drool of his work whilst carefully making sure that his work wasn't ruined by the drool. Sometimes Ichigo hated his life, and this was one of those moments. Ichigo stood up from his chair and stretched his arms and legs in attempt to get the feeling in his legs back. Checking the time, Ichigo was annoyed to see that it was now 9:30 p.m. He had just wasted the whole day sleeping. God damn it, I wasted all of my day just sleeping. Ichigo felt restless. He knew that he wasn't going to be able to go to sleep tonight. He needed to go out and do something, anything to forget about that dream. He didn't want to think about it, what it implies, and he didn't want anything to do with that dream, because it had to be a dream. Ichigo sighed. He really didn't need this right now. The date that the first chapter of the graphic novel that was to be published was coming up frighteningly fast, and if he didn't meet the deadline, then he wouldn't be able to afford the necessities of life such as food. He needed this to work or he wouldn't know what he would do. What I don't need is conflicting emotions, at least not until I have published the first chapter. He needed to clear his head right now. Strolling into his bedroom, he threw open his cupboard and reached inside, and after a few seconds of searching, Ichigo pulled out a bakken. He held the wooden sword within his right hand, feeling the weight and balance of the training sword. He had bought the sword 8 years ago when he realized that while he may never be able to use his Zappakuto again, it didn't mean that he couldn't use a sword to get rid of stress. He also felt that he still needed to keep up with his training even if most of the training options were far out of his reach. To this day Ichigo was amazed at how physically strong his human body had become due to his spiritual one. He even tested just how strong his body was one day by lifting some weights. Unsurprisingly, when Ichigo managed to lift what amounted to a small car in weight, his jaw had reached the floor and had attempted to continue downwards by burrowing into the ground. Ichigo smiled slightly at the Bakken and was about to close the cupboard, but he saw the bag that contained the item that he had purchased from a certain shop a month ago. Placing the sword down on the floor, Ichigo reached for the bag and gently lifted the purchased item from it. Feeling the smooth silk fabric run through his fingers, he unfolded the article of clothing and was presented with that dress, the dress that had taken his breath away. Well, it wasn't the dress that took his breath away, it was the woman wearing the dress that stole his breath and almost didn't return it. And at that moment, Ichigo decided. Quickly but carefully refolding the expensive dress, Ichigo gently placed it within the bag. He grabbed the plastic handle of the store bag and lifted it up as he himself stood up from the crouch that he was previously in. To hell with it. Ichigo placed the bag on his bed and returned to the cupboard. Shoving his arms within, he practically yanked out a clean, smart black dark orange shirt, a color that he knew she loved, and some black dress pants. He flung them onto his bed. "I need this." Hurriedly undressing himself from his casual clothes, he rushed into his bathroom to wash up, cleaning his face, washing hair as best as possible as he attempted to untangle it from when he had fallen asleep. I was foolish. Double-checking to make sure that he was at least presentable to her, he briefly contemplated cutting his hair back to its original length but quickly removed that thought from his head. He couldn't risk his identity if it all went south from what he was planning to do. I thought I could deal with the feeling. Running back into his bedroom, Ichigo went through the process of putting his smart clothing on. He buttoned up the dark orange shirt up to the third button from the last, and he dusted off the imaginary dust from his smooth dress pants. Who was I kidding? Ichigo placed his trainers on. He thought about wearing a pair of smart-looking shoes but dismissed the idea when he realized that he was so anxious that he was probably going to be doing a lot of running in the next few minutes. He cemented that idea as he tied the final knot on his shoes. I need her. Taking a quick moment to look outside, Ichigo was annoyed to find that it was pouring rain like no tomorrow, and before the thought that maybe he shouldn't do this could creep, Ichigo had already moved back into his bedroom for the final item. I need her to be with me. Grabbing the bag that was located on his bed, Ichigo stormed towards the front door. He reached it and grabbed the doorknob, taking a second to have a deep breath. Ichigo flung the door open, not caring the slightest as his door had smacked into the wall, creating a dent in it. I don't care if it's Mugetsu and not Ichigo that she cares for. Looking at the rain in front of him, he realized that he had left his coat in his cupboard and that he should probably go and get it, and yet he didn't, the adrenaline pumping through his veins preventing such rational thought. Ichigo took his first step towards the next chapter in his life. I don't care if I have to tell her everything. The pouring rain didn't even slightly faze Ichigo because he had a mission. Turning around, he closed his front door and locked it. By now he was already soaked to the brim, but the bag wasn't. No, the bag was hidden underneath his body so that the rain couldn't touch it. It was just too important at the moment. Ichigo shuddered, already knowing that the downpour of rain was going to make him ill, and he couldn't have cared less. Turning around once again, Ichigo looked towards Karakura town from atop his hill, and he ran. He ran as fast as he could. I just want Yoruichi to be with me. The rain was even more brutal than what Ichigo originally thought it was. His long hair was already soaked to the brim, weighing the running man down. Ichigo quickly pushed his air from in front of his eyes as the rain had MDE'd, so his eyes were covered by wet hair. Ichigo ran down the hill as fast as he could whilst making sure that the bag was always underneath his body as he ran. Ichigo reached the bottom of the hill and broke off into a dead-on sprint. Making his way into Ichigo's hometown, Ichigo vaulted over a chain-link fence as he crossed into the shopping district of Karakura town. Urahara's Shoten was located in the middle of the district, and Ichigo was taking the quickest way possible to it. Passing through an alleyway that would take him into the central part of the district where the Shoten was located. Coming up to a head-high wooden fence within the alley, Ichigo didn't even pause in his sprint as he pushed off the side wall and used the momentum to hop over the fence, keeping his speed going by pushing off the ground with the hand that wasn't holding the bag. He was now able to see Urahara's Shoten, and his heart started to beat even faster. Coming up to the front of the Shoten, Ichigo took deep breath, feeling exhausted by all of the running he had done to get to this place. Making his way up to the front door, Ichigo suddenly felt the nerves affect him. He had to move quickly, otherwise he was going to run away. Steeling himself, Ichigo pressed the new doorbell that Urahara had installed recently. Seconds ticked by, each second making Ichigo all the more nervous. Ichigo started to count the seconds within his head. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, damn it Ichigo. Calm down. Ichigo was now shivering terribly at this point, the pouring rain now taking its icy effect onto Ichigo's weakening resolve at what he was doing. Please, please open the door. Ichigo pressed the doorbell once again and again in desperation. 15, 16, 17, 18, come on. Ichigo stood outside the door just waiting, his eyes not moving from the door that was in his way. Swoosh, the sliding door went as it opened up in front of Ichigo and his breath hitched in his throat, but he was disappointed with it not being her opening the door. Instead it was Urahara, whose eyes widened when he saw who was standing outside. Ichigo just looked at Urahara's face, unsure of what to say to the shopkeeper in front of him. Urahara seemed to regain his composure as he opened the ever-present fan that he always had on him. Why hello there. How may I help you at this time? As you can see, the shop is closed for the night. Please come by tomorrow. Urahara attempted to close the sliding door, but Ichigo placed his hand on the door, preventing it. Please. See, can you get Yoruichi F for me? Urahara's eyebrows rose above his fan as he considered what the strange black-haired man had asked of him. Each person stared at each other for a few seconds, Ichigo unconsciously shivering as he was still stood outside in the rain. After a few more seconds, Urahara sighed as he motioned Ichigo to come into the shop. Ichigo sighed in relief as he came into the store, and moved to where Urahara said to sit down. As Ichigo sat down whilst Urahara moved back into the living area behind the shop. As Ichigo sat in a chair at the front of the shop, he started to tap his feet in anticipation, taking periodical looks into the bag to make sure that the dress was safe and dry. After a few minutes of waiting and shivering uncontrollably, she finally came into the room. Miu-san? She asked as she fully walked into the room, but her eyes widened in complete worry as she saw him shivering. Mugetsu! She exclaimed as she rushed to him, kneeling down next to him and pulling him into her arms, and she was extremely concerned to find Ichigo to be freezing cold and shivering in her grip. Gently pulling him from the chair, she sat him down in front of her and she faced him on the floor. Ichigo grabbed the bag from nearby and with his shivering hands, passed it towards the woman that he held affections for. F for you. Yo-chan. Miu, it can wait. What's happened to you? Yoruichi held the bag and briefly looked at it and put it to the side as she pulled Ichigo into an embrace, hoping to warm up Ichigo's cold body. She started to rub her hands up and down Ichigo's arms, creating friction to heat him up. Ichigo didn't know what to think right now. All he knew was that Yoruichi was holding him in her arms and that he was happy about it. Slowly, almost scared, he reached his arms around her and held her to him, and he tried to convey his emotions and feelings to her within the hug. Mugetsu, please, just listen to me. He continued to hold Yoruichi as close as possible, whilst she continued to warm up his arms. As you know, I live alone, no family, not anymore anyway. I've not had any contact with anyone for 10 years. Ichigo took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he was going to say next. Except you, Yoruichi. I. Shush. It's okay Miu. It's okay Miu. Yoruichi couldn't believe her ears at what he was saying. She couldn't help but feel the hope within her rise due to what he was saying. No, I have to say, Yoruichi, please. Open the bag and take it out. Yoruichi hated to let go of the man in her grasp, but she reluctantly did and held the bag in her arms. Ichigo released her from his grip as well so she could see what was in the bag better. Reaching into the bag, Yoruichi was shocked to see the dress from that day she had taken Mugetsu shopping. Her eyes widened as she looked from the dress to the man shivering in front of her. I remember that day every night. That was the day that I think my heart decided for me, but my mind needed time to catch up with that decision. Ichigo steeled his breath as he moved closer to Yoruichi, taking the dress from her hands and putting it back into the bag. He held her hands and stared into her golden eyes. Yoruichi, I know that you don't know much about me. In fact, I have so many secrets that I'm pretty sure I have mental problems, but what I do know is that I'd tell you everything about me. Everything. Because I. Ichigo was cut off as his lips were now captured by chocolate brown lips. The chocolate brown lips of the woman in front of him. So surprised with what was happening, it took Ichigo a minute to realize what to do, but he was brought back into reality when Yoruichi placed herself onto his lap and circled her arms around his neck. And Ichigo replied with gusto, wrapping his arms around her waist and deepening the kiss. It being his first kiss, he thought it would be sloppy and embarrassing. Instead, he found that his kiss was everything his world mattered about that moment. The kiss lasted for a while, and when it ended, both people leaned their foreheads together as they stared into each other's eyes. Mugetsu, I don't care for your secrets. If you feel like you have to tell me, then you can, because as from right now, I live with you. Ichigo had to take a double take as he looked at Yoruichi's beaming face as Yoruichi continued. Mew-kun. I also have many secrets that I have to tell you and hope you will still accept me, but there is one thing that I do know. Yoruichi leaned further towards the man she held affections for. For some reason, you make me feel alive. Yoruichi's lips once again connected with Ichigo's. And at that moment Ichigo knew that he had made the right decision and that whatever happens now, he would accept it with his arms wide open and with a smile on his face because now, he had someone to be with. Grumblings can be heard as the reply. A loud sigh occurs shortly after the grumble as the footsteps can be heard coming closer to the supposed Mew-kun's location. The noise of a wooden door creaking open can be heard, the sound of it almost deafening within the silence that the room permeates. The sound of quiet feet shuffling along the carpeted floor. A bed is against the wall. In the middle of each wall, in the bed was a man with flowing black hair sleeping peacefully within. The footsteps grew louder and faint giggling could be heard if one would stress their ears hard enough. The unknown assailant stood at the base of the bed, now simply staring at the man sleeping within. The shaded figure crouched slightly in preparations and waited for a few tense seconds. "Wake up, Mew-kun," shouted the figure as it jumped from the floor onto the person sleeping known as Mew-kun. Arrrrrgggghhh. A high-pitched scream could be heard as the man in the bed felt the weight of his assailant landing upon him, waking him very suddenly from his slumber. Happy laughter could be heard throughout the house as Mew-kun woke with a startle to see the one woman he had ever loved, fully dressed, lying on top of him with an incredible mischievous glint within her golden eyes. "Ow! Yoruichi. Why did you do that?" the man asked as he rubbed some leftover sleep from his recently woken eyes. Yoruichi's response was to smile innocently and start to get up off the man. However, the man wasn't having any of it. Leaning up quickly, he wrapped his arms around his love and pulled her back down to the bed, chuckling inwardly as he caused his goddess to let out a surprised eep. The man landed back on the bed, holding Yoruichi tightly to his body, laughing out loud as he felt her futilely trying to get out of his grasp. After a minute of struggling, of which it was obvious that Yoruichi wasn't really trying to release herself from her love's hold, finally she gave up and simply lied on top of her, Mew-kun. Knowing that she wasn't going to try and escape from him, Mugetsu removed one arm from around the dark-skinned beauty and started to run his fingers through her long purple hair, both people enjoying the feeling. The two of them lied there for a while, simply soaking in the fact that they were in fact together and nothing was going to stop that. They continued to lie in silence, Ichigo gently running his right hand through Yoruichi's hair whilst his left hand was on her hip, keeping her stable upon his body. As Ichigo did this, Yoruichi simply rested her head upon the black-haired man's chest, listening and feeling his relaxed heartbeat, which was starting to lull her to sleep. But that wasn't what she came into here for. It was time for Mugetsu to get up. So very reluctantly, she raised her head so she could clearly stare into Mugetsu's deep brown eyes, intently staring back into her own eyes. Such pretty eyes, so much like Ichigo's. "Ichigo, where did you go?" Unintentionally, Yoruichi's mood soured, which did not go unnoticed by the man underneath herself. Shaking her slightly, he was glad when her eyes went from unfocused and back on his eyes. "Hey, what's wrong, Yo-chan?" he asked softly as he stroked her cheek with his hand, the contact sending slight jolts through both members. Yoruichi, despite her forlorn thoughts, couldn't help but grin at the man who held her cheek in his gentle hand. She couldn't believe how lucky she was in finding this man and making him a part of her everyday life. "It's nothing, Mugetsu-kun. I'm simply thinking of the past and someone important to who I failed to make sure was okay." Ichigo's brain thought of anyone who she could have failed and he kept coming up blank as to who she was referring to. Soifan? No. Yoruichi can simply go into the C-Trade anytime she pleases and see her past pupil, so it can't be her. I really can't think of anyone who she could have failed that I know of. Unless, no, that's silly. She can't believe she failed who I think she thinks she failed. He was a stubborn person, very headstrong and dedicated to everyone he cared for. I mean, this guy would have taken a bullet for any one of his friends and then asked them if they were okay. Yoruichi started to recall of the characteristics that fit the person she was remembering, and each of these characteristics were making Ichigo worried for the woman in his arms. I failed him. He did some very heroic things and saved a lot of people, myself including, and none of the people, myself included, even went to see the poor guy. Hey, it's okay. Whoever this guy is, I'm sure he's happy that he was able to save his precious people. I know I'd be happy with that if I was in this guy's shoes. Hey, that's the thing. You remind me so much of the person. You care deeply about those precious to you, never minding the fact that basically amounts to me. Ichigo chuckles at that last comment whilst also feeling slightly overwhelmed with what Yoruichi had said before about failing the person. And now he was certain he knew who she was talking about, and he couldn't help but feel bad over the fact that he put the person he loved in emotional pain without knowing. Unsure of what to do, Ichigo simply held Yoruichi tightly against him in an attempt to share the burden of sadness that she held for all this time. It killed him inside knowing that he couldn't risk revealing his true identity just yet, even to the person he loved. The danger that would place over his family and Yoruichi herself was too great at the moment, and Ichigo hated that fact, plain and simple. However, she wasn't looking to be depressed as she was in such a happy relationship, so she thought of the fateful day they both confessed, and because of this Yoruichi chuckled and Ichigo raised his brow in response, wondering as to what she found amusing. Nothing, it's just the fact that it's been 2 months since that day you came to the shop in the middle of the night whilst the rain was pouring. That was really stupid, by the way. You could have gotten hypothermia or something like that. Yoruichi kindly scolded her boyfriend underneath her. Ichigo chortled in response. Totally worth it. I'd do it again if I had to, because you're one of the greatest things to have ever happened to me, he stated proudly, and felt his heart swell when he noticed the incredibly faint blush that she had adorned on her beautiful face, and he was going to let her know that he saw it. Ha! Finally! I made you blush. That'd teach you for all of the teasing you put me through. Ichigo never thought in his life that he would be able to make the proud tease goddess be embarrassed, and then he realized something. Maybe the fact that he had never seen Yoruichi be embarrassed was because of the fact that she would not appreciate being embarrassed. Which means that she would exact her revenge for said embarrassment, which was proven by the mock glare and smirk she sent his way. Ichigo gulped in nervousness, but in the back of his head he thought that he'd probably wouldn't mind the revenge that she would enact on his person. This caused Ichigo to briefly wonder when he became such a masochist that he'd enjoy a form of revenge placed upon him. Omu-kun, Yoruichi said sickeningly sweetly as she delicately placed her forefinger on her Mu-kun's cheek, and then she gently dragged it down, past his neck onto his bare chest. Ichigo realized that her revenge might be happening a bit earlier than he had anticipated. Yes my dear. Yoruichi leaned in closer to Ichigo's face and he ate his lips in anticipation of what was going to happen. She angled her clothed legs so it rubbed up against his member, causing Ichigo to groan in pleasure, which was quickly followed by a groan of annoyance as the leg was removed as soon as it started. Ichigo pouted like an impudent child towards Yoruichi. That was harsh, Yoruichi-san, he sarcastically remarked at her, which made the woman laugh at his childishness. Reaching up quickly, Yoruichi planted a soppy kiss on Ichigo's lips in apology, and Ichigo was more than happy to respond in earnest as he deepened the kiss. What started out as Yoruichi waking up Ichigo turned into a serious makeout session. And Ichigo as well as Yoruichi couldn't have been happier than they currently were. But of course something always has to interrupt Ichigo's life if something was going well for once, because for some bizarre reason, the universe would collapse into itself if Ichigo wasn't miserable in some way. Knock. Knock. The couple split apart, Ichigo blushing like a ripe potato, the blush easily reaching his entire face since he shaved his beard off. On Yoruichi's suggestion, of course. Whilst Yoruichi simply looked amused at Ichigo's shy reaction. But then she groaned as she got up off the bed to answer the front door. God damn, whoever dared to interrupt my Mugetsu time. I swear if this isn't important there'll be some kind of hell to pay. Yoruichi stomped towards the front door whilst Ichigo got out of bed and headed for a shower, briefly thinking that an angry Yoruichi was hot. Which was strange coming from his head because before he had never thought any woman to be hot. But then again, It seems that Yoruichi has changed my way of thinking in the short 2 months that we have been together as a couple. Hell, I even went ahead and went through the trouble of extending my home just so she was more comfortable. I mean, Christ. Who'd thought I'd actually expand my bedroom so it could accommodate a double bed and a large wardrobe, because I certainly didn't. As Ichigo began the process of showering, his mind wandered to all that had happened during what could be some of the best months in his life. He realized that even though he had spent at least 9 to 10 years being an antisocial hermit of the highest degree, all it had taken to become social again was to spend 2 months with Yoruichi. To be honest, Ichigo was a bit put off at how quickly all the hard work he had placed in his hermit-like tendencies had dispersed when Yoruichi got involved. But he couldn't deny that he hadn't been happier since he lost his powers. Finishing up his shower, Ichigo dried his extremely long hair, which Yoruichi loved to smell, weirdly enough. Must be something to do with her cat-like tendencies, because I guess cats like to smell things? After the lengthy process of drying his hair, making sure to check in the mirror to check if any of the dye had come off, he was pleased to see no specks of orange in his flowing black hair. Wrapping a towel around his waist, Ichigo walked back into the bedroom to put his clothes on for the day. Coming back into the bedroom, Ichigo was embarrassed to see Yoruichi standing in the doorway grinning cheekily at him in nothing but a bath towel. Ichigo blushed but felt like he should make a comment anyway. He seemed to do that a lot since Yoruichi arrived. Massing his courage, he placed his hands on his hips, making sure that his towel won't fall. He smirked straight back at the beautiful woman in front of him, wearing black jeans with a dark orange tank top and a pair of orange socks with cute chibi cats on them. Those were a gift from Ichigo a week after she moved in with him, and then she demanded multiple pairs with different colors and cats. To which he obeyed like the good little puppy he was. Yes, he was utterly whipped by the woman in his house, but he couldn't care less. In fact, he loved it. "You like what you see, Yo-chan?" he teasingly asked. Oh god, Yoruichi was a bad influence on him. Yoruichi's eyes widened slightly at Ichigo's flirty comment, but composed herself rather quickly as she purposefully ate her lips at him as her eyes obviously roamed over Ichigo's ripped body. "Oh yes, I do indeed," she responded, and felt amused when Ichigo blushed at his tease backfiring on him. "Aw, get outta here, you pervert. Tell me who it was in the living room." Yoruichi laughed uncontrollably as she turned around and strutted out of the room, making sure to emphasize her rear end, knowing full well that her boyfriend's eyes were following it completely. Ichigo shook his head as he considered what a pervert the woman he loved was. Getting dressed was easy enough. Ichigo wore a simply black shirt with baggy track pants for comfort. He left the bedroom barefooted as he believed he didn't need socks to warm his feet at the moment. Walking into the living room, he was surprised to see Yoruichi sitting on the couch fumbling with her fingers in what he believed to be nervousness. "Yo-chan, what's the matter? Who was at the door?" he asked worriedly. Yoruichi raised her head and looked directly into Ichigo's eyes. "Mew-kun, I have to leave for a while, to go visit some important people." She left her comment hanging for Ichigo to register what she had just said. A range of feelings and emotions roamed within Ichigo's very being at that moment. Anxiousness at what Yoruichi actually meant by visit some important people. Anger because he realized that the people she was referring to were most likely the Shinigamis within Seirei. And finally, confusion as to why they would want to speak to her. Oh god. Don't let it be something to do with me. Ichigo swallowed a nervous lump in his throat as he knelt in front of the nervous-looking Yoruichi. Placing a brave smile on his face, he held her shaking hands, thus making her look up into his eyes. "Hey, don't worry about it. We'll just make sure to catch up when you get back. I assume you'll be coming back?" Yoruichi nodded quickly at that question and smiled slightly at Ichigo's attempt to cheer her up. "Then there's nothing to be so nervous about, is there?" he asked rhetorically, and Yoruichi just smiled in response as she leaned into Ichigo's body and he wrapped her up in a hug and rubbed her back comfortingly. "You go talk to these so-called important people, then you come back here and make sure I haven't become mess without you about the house," he said jokingly as she giggled. "When do you have to go?" "They said that I should come as soon as possible." Ichigo smiled. "Well then, if you leave now, you can come back even earlier, which means you get to be bugged by me. And isn't that what really matters?" The lopsided grin that Ichigo was showing caused Yoruichi's love to bloom even larger than before as she smashed her lips onto his, surprising Ichigo greatly, as he once again responded by ravenously kissing her back. The kiss lasted for a few more seconds before Yoruichi pulled back and leaned her forehead onto Ichigo's forehead. Well then. Mugetsu, when I get back I expect a hug, a kiss and a full day just lying in bed with you. You understand me? You expect anything different? Ichigo asked sarcastically as he pulled her to her feet. Okay. Get whatever you need for the trip while I get your coat. Make sure to take the special socks. I will, my love. Ichigo chuckled as he went to the coat rack near then front door, picking up the black leather jacket that Yoruichi owned. He brought it towards their bedroom to give it her. Once inside he saw Yoruichi standing in the room now wearing a pair of orange trainers. And a simple black bag with a shoulder strap which Ichigo assumed were filled with the special socks. She really likes those socks. Hell, I bought them for a joke originally. Okay. I'm all ready, Mew-kun. Yoruichi states as she walks over to the man holding her coat. Turning around when she reached him, Ichigo helped the jacket on her as a gentleman should. His dad at least taught him some useful things when it came to how to treat women. Both of them walked to the front door and Ichigo opened it for her when they reached it. The door revealing the massive hill of which they lived on top of. I'll probably be back within a week, Mew-kun. Just wait for me, please. Ichigo was going to snort at the stupid request when he saw her eyes. Her eyes were serious. They looked desperate, almost desperate for Ichigo to wait for her. I keep forgetting that I know nothing about her 100 of years before I became a Shinigami. Something must have happened to make her be like this. Ichigo smiled reassuringly as he gave Yoruichi a final hug before she left. Don't worry, Yoruichi, I'll always be here for you. Because I love you, he whispered into the flash step goddess's ear. He felt Yoruichi deepen the hug by holding him tighter after that, as she herself whispered into his ear. I know, Mugetsu. I love you too. And with that said, Yoruichi let go, as did Ichigo, both reluctantly of course. Yoruichi stepped back, sending another smile towards the black-haired man, and Ichigo responded with the same thing. He watched her go down the hill, full well knowing that she didn't him to hold her hand all the way. Anyway, Ichigo knew that he'd see her soon and be able to look upon that smile of hers anytime he wished to. If only he knew that that'd be the last time he'd see that smile for a while. Turning around, he closed the front door and went to his workstation to continue with his graphic novel, because of course. The story must continue. Chap 5 end. Really hoped you enjoyed it. I feel like I'm about 1/3 of the way through of this amazing story of which I love to write. Please tell me what you think of all the romance within this chapter. Is it any good? I always feel like I'm at my best when writing romance, but I'd like a second opinion to make sure it's good. Thank you all for all of the support you've all given me. Do not worry, this precious gem of a story of mine will be finished. Remember, read the omake below for some comedy. Also, 1 out of 3 of the alternate endings from last chapter are beneath the omake. Let me know what you think about them as well. This is me signing off for chapter 5, Ya ne omake. Ichigo meets Urahara, again? Ichigo wasn't too happy today. He had woken up with no Yoruichi next to him in bed and no Yoruichi in his house. All that was left was a simple note on his kitchen cabinet that read, Hey Mew-kun. I'm currently visiting my friend, Kazuki Urahara, ya know. The man who runs the sweet shop in the shopping district. When you get up, come over to the shop so I can introduce you to him. I'll bet you two would get along like a house on fire. See ya there, love you. It wasn't that he hated the crazy Shinigami scientist, he simply disliked the fact that he had to re-meet the guy after he spent 9 to 10 years avoiding the weirdo. Yoruichi was going to be the death of him at this rate. Ichigo had now reached the shoten and knocked on the wood near the sliding door to get the occupant's attention. He waited for a few minutes until the man in question opened the door and stared at the black-haired fellow stood in front of him. Ichigo felt nervous for a strange reason. Hi, I'm Arg. Ichigo was grabbed by the scruff of his shirt as Urahara glared threateningly at the black-haired fellow that he held. I know who you are. If I hear that you've even thought about mistreating Yoruichi, I'll end your very existence. Ichigo had no idea how to respond to that, so when the man suddenly let him go and smiled innocently, he was even more confused. Well, with the introductions out of the way, come on in, Yoruichi's waiting. Ichigo nodded as he dumbly stepped into the shoten. Yep. She's going to be the death of me. Let it be known that Ichigo Kurosaki had never considered himself as being a patient human being. I mean, Storming the enemy's stronghold during a war with 3 people doesn't seem the most patient thing he could have done. Of course he'd still do it any day of the week to save someone precious to him. But that was at least 10 years ago. And Ichigo liked to think that he had matured since then. And he had. That's why instead of waiting one day for Yoruichi to return from what he had assumed was the Seirei, he waited a whole week instead. Big improvements. However, since it has been a week since Yoruichi's leaving, Ichigo was now classed as worried and he needed to know what was wrong, if anything was. However, since Ichigo had no spiritual pressure to speak of, he was going to have to get creative to find out any information out about where his love was. And he hated it. But he was going to it up and be a man if it was to find out about Yoruichi. Because she hadn't been back for a week and obviously Ichigo was worried. Now a week may seem a little presumptuous, but this was the worry of a man whose only social contact for the past 9 years had consisted of the woman in question, a black cat who was the woman in disguise and himself. So you could forgive him for being a tiny bit anxious as to where said woman was. Anyway, he was crap at talking to himself. He himself told him that, anyway, since Ichigo had to become creative, he needed some help. He hated it, but he needed Urahara's help. Now normally this wouldn't be a problem, but since Ichigo was still hiding, so to speak, he couldn't let Urahara find out who he was. So all he had to do was convince Urahara to let Ichigo know where Yoruichi was, why she was still there, if and when she was supposed to be coming back, and keep his knowledge of the Seirei a secret and also keep his identity a secret. Easy, right? Right? And that's why we find Ichigo walking up the road that led to Urahara's shoten. Of course the idea that Yoruichi was just simply late had crossed his mind many times within the long stressful week, but whenever that thought appeared he'd see that look. The look she had gave him one week on the day where she told him that she was going to have to leave for a bit. That wasn't the look of someone who thought they'd be coming back. It was the look of something Ichigo had become chillingly close to, resignation that everything was hopeless. Obviously the idea that it all just his paranoia acting up had crossed his thoughts, but with each passing day he became to realize Yoruichi wasn't coming back, so he had to go get her, any way possible. And if that meant that he'd have to trick the trickster, Urahara, to do so, he'd happily oblige. Ichigo had now come up to the shoten and was caught by surprise. The shop was closed as in no one was actually within the building. No lights were on and no one was outside on the porch, brushing the leaves away. Something's wrong. For as long as I have known that creepy shopkeeper, there has not been a single day where Urahara hadn't had those 2 kids sweeping on the porch unless the weather was terrible or something like. The weather was currently sunny with no sign of rain. A frown marred Ichigo's face. This was wrong, very wrong. Knowing that something was very wrong, Ichigo carefully crept towards the shoten sliding doors and as quietly as possible slid them open. Ichigo was expecting to see the usual shelves lined with all sorts of sweets from all over the world, but Ichigo didn't see that. No, when Ichigo laid his eyes upon the shop floor he saw everything in shambles. All of the shelves had been thrown about and the sweets upon them were strewn across the floor carelessly, and it was at this moment that Ichigo knew that no one was in the shoten, not anymore at least. Ichigo let himself in and closed the door behind him. The shop floor looked to be the location of what Ichigo had to assume was where a fight or at least a dispute had occurred. Nothing else could explain why the room was a wreck, and Urahara would never allow his beautiful, sweet shop to be harmed if he was here. Which meant that Urahara was no longer in his shoten, and the only other place Urahara could have been was the Seirei. Ichigo nodded at his logic. There was no other explanation as to where the obnoxious shopkeeper was. But it still didn't explain what had happened to the shoten in the first place and why Urahara wasn't there as well. Ichigo directed his eyes towards the back of the shop. If he couldn't find any answers in the shop floor, maybe he'd find them in the back somewhere. Making sure to avoid stepping on anything that might have been of importance to Urahara, Ichigo pulls back the curtain that separates the front and back room and stops dead in his tracks at what he sees. What happened here? The back room was worse off than the front room. Everything was broken. The little table that was usually located within the middle of the room was now a broken heap upon the floor, in multiple pieces all cluttered on the cracked wooden floor. Now Ichigo's mind went into overdrive, his eyes roaming everywhere that they possibly could for any information relating to what happened here. His eyes landed on the small TV that was located in the corner of the room. Somehow it had managed to be left untouched, and considering the state of the room, that was suspicious to Ichigo. Moving over to the TV and crouching down in front of it, he noticed that it was plugged in. With a shrug of his shoulders, Ichigo turned the TV on. If you're watching this, then I am already dead. What? Ichigo's eyes widened as he viewed a pre-recorded message left by none other than Urahara on the screen. Wait, he's dead? Just kidding. Ichigo slowly placed his face in his hands and screamed into then, making it muffled. Now, if you are watching this, then you must already know me, or at least know about me and where I came from. Otherwise, why would you be here? Unless you are Mugetsu looking for Yoruichi. If it is, you listen extra carefully because I'm about to blow your mind. And so the Urahara on the TV went on to explain about the Seraiti, Reiatsu and the Shinagamis, and how it was a place where all souls go when they are dead. But Ichigo already knew all of this, and consequently so did Mugetsu. He grabbed the TV and started to shake it in annoyance. What was that about Yoruichi, you moron? I already know about all of this. By now, you've started to shake the TV in anger due to the fact that I have neglected to tell you about Yoruichi, Mugetsu, but I believe I know a better person to tell you, so I present to you, Yoruichi-chan. Ichigo's frustrations evaporated as his brown-skinned lover appeared on the screen. He lifted his hand ever so slowly and placed it upon the screen, directly where Yoruichi's cheek was, in a desperate attempt to feel his love's cheek and caress it like he would normally do. However, the face of his lover wasn't in that smug little smirk that he loved so much. No, her face was marred with a deep frown and a sad look in her golden eyes, of which he loved to lose himself within. When the hell did I become such a for romance? But Ichigo wasn't able to think further upon this, as the Yoruichi on the screen had begun to talk. Mugetsu, if that's you, then I want you to listen very carefully. Even though she hadn't said anything bad just yet, Ichigo felt his stomach drop in anxiousness. When we first met over 9 years ago in that little cafe that you love so much, I somehow knew that we'd end up as good friends, but as lovers? I had no idea that would happen. A sad smile appeared on Yoruichi's beautiful. Why is she sad? No, I don't think I want to hear this. His lover on the screen took a deep breath and continued with her little speech, and Ichigo didn't want to notice it, but it was getting harder and harder not to see the dark bags under Yoruichi's delicate eyes, as well as what was obviously tear marks on her cheeks. Yoruichi, what's wrong? I'll make it all go away, just come back to me, please, I need you. Mugetsu, I can't believe I never asked for your last name during the months we were together. I guess I was just too happy to be with you. But I suppose somewhere inside my head, I knew that it wasn't going to last. Ichigo's world stopped dead. What? From Urahara's little explanation, you already know about Shinagamis and such. And as you have already figured out, I am one of those Shinigami, and therein lay the problem. We can't be together. No, 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 don't you dare, don't you dare. You see, the unspoken law with all Shinigami is that they are not allowed a relationship with a human being. This law was passed by the Spirit King himself, and as such that makes our love illegal. Ichigo didn't want to hear the rest. Already his tears were staining the wooden floor, and already his hands were clenched so tightly that drops of blood were dripping from his hands. On that day when someone knocked our door, it was a captain from Seraiti demanding that I come back and be held for disobeying a direct order from the Spirit King himself. They also wanted you. They wanted to kill you. But I told them that I was just using you so they wouldn't hold you accountable. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I never told you all of this when we were together. I'm sorry for getting you involved. I'm sorry for everything. The tears were flowing down Yoruichi's face now as she started to fall apart, and Ichigo's heart felt like it wanted to blow up due to this. Yoruichi. His Yoruichi should never have to feel like that. Ichigo growled to himself. He was just so useless. He couldn't save anyone in the end. He hated it. The woman he loved was in pure agony, and he couldn't do a thing to help her. God damn it, Ichigo bashed his fists upon the cracked wooden floor of the shoten, and he didn't care when his fists went straight through the floorboards. He didn't care when he felt one of his fingers on his right hand snap like a toothpick. He didn't care, because he had failed the most important person in his life. He had failed her, he had failed himself, he had failed everyone in the end. Mew-kun. A small voice broke Ichigo out of his stupor, and his eyes once again landed on his love on the TV. Mew-kun. I know you'll be broken up about this, but let me tell you one thing. No matter what anyone says, No matter what happens, I want you to remember just one thing. Ichigo leaned forward. He couldn't risk not hearing this. I'm not sorry for falling in love with you. The screen went black. Ichigo panicked when the screen went black. He grabbed it in desperation and began to shake the TV. No, please. There have to be more. There just has to be. Please don't do this to me. Please, I need you. I. Tears were falling in droves from Ichigo's eyes now as he simply released the TV and just stared at the black screen desperately. Ichigo sat there, in front of the TV for what seemed like forever. Not once did he move from his spot or even let his eyes stray from the TV. The words replayed themselves over and over in his head, and every time they would focus on the last thing Yoruichi said to him. I'm not sorry for falling in love with you. Ichigo shakily stood up and turned to leave. He didn't know what he needed, but he'd get it, and when he did, he'd know what to do. He reached the curtain and stopped in his tracks when the spark of the TV turning on again caught his attention. He rushed around, and before he knew it, he was back in front of the TV. Urahara was currently on it, looking around shiftily, his usual lazy demeanor gone, replaced with a cautious, almost worried look. Finally his eyes landed upon Ichigo and he began his speech. Mugetsu, I know you're there, no one else would bother coming here, and right now I need you to listen closely. This is being recorded just after Yoruichi's recording, and she doesn't know about this. This is between me and you. What? I know you don't want to believe any of what she had told you, but it's my sad duty to inform you that it is all true. The Spirit King did forbid love between a living being and a Shinigami. It's one of his stupider laws, but it is one. However, that isn't the only thing that brought Yoruichi back to the Seirei. In fact, no one particularly cares for that law right now, because the thing that brought Yoruichi back to Seirei was also the thing that brought me back. Seirei is at war. Ichigo's eyes widened like saucers at that revelation. Another war? Just 10 years after the last? Does no one ever learn? But who is the Seirei at war with? You're probably wondering who we are at war with right now. We're at war with the Kinesis. Wait, how is that even possible? The Quincy's were another spiritually aware race that hunted hollows hundreds of years ago. Sadly, due to the fact that they didn't cleanse a hollow's soul when they killed them, the Seirei deemed them dangerous, and therefore removed them, so we thought. It seems that we missed quite a few of them, and now they are strong enough to threaten the Seirei. They even managed to defeat the Sotaichu, the strongest Shinigami, so yay, we might be having problems. Ichigo couldn't help but groan. Only, might be having problems? Yep, that's Urahara, hasn't changed a bit. But why tell me any of this? Now, you're probably wondering why I am telling you any of this in the first place. You're thinking that you can't do anything in the first place. But I am here to inform you otherwise. Ichigo's eyes widened in surprise. There was something he could do to help. Mugetsu. You see, another reason why Yoruichi didn't say anything about this was because of the fact this was also rather personal for her. You see, a couple hundred years ago Yoruichi was soon to be married with a fellow Shinigami, but sadly a few days before the wedding a small Quincy rebel band attacked and managed to kill this Shinigami. You see, she wants to get revenge for her fallen love from so long ago, because the leader of the Quincy attack is the same man who killed him. That's all she has ever told me of her past with this Shinigami. I don't even know his name or rank, or anything about him. All I know is that she is thinking of you the same why she thought of him. Hell, she may be thinking of you even more than she thought of him at this point. I honestly don't know. It took a few seconds for all of the information to sink in. He couldn't believe Yoruichi believed in something as hopeless as revenge, and he found out the hard way that fighting for revenge only led to sadness and death. But he could understand where Yoruichi was coming from. If he was to see Yoruichi die, he would chase the murderer throughout the universe until said attacker's skull was underneath his foot. But Yoruichi isn't going to die. Mugetsu, I fear for Yoruichi's mind. All of these things happening would break anyone's mind, and I haven't seen her smile for ages. She needs you besides her, and quickly. Yes, but how? That's why, as I am a genius, have developed something that will allow you to interact with souls and even fight on the strength of a captain. Ichigo was gobsmacked at this revelation. Urahara had been developing something like this for him? However, this object won't activate unless you have even a smidgen of Ryotsu, so here's hoping you do. Ichigo groaned. Just tell me what the hell I need to do already. What you need to do is find my secret training grounds hidden under the shop and head to the center of the training field. There is something that looks similar to a wristband. Put it on and hope you have some Ryotsu. If you do, your obvious Ryotsu increase will alert a sensor I placed and open a Senkaimon for you. Use that to get to Seirei. Once you enter Seirei, don't enter the structure within the middle. It's guarded to thoroughly. You have to find a building with 2 arms on it. This is important. Once you find it, tell them you know Yoruichi. They will help you get in. Once inside, you will have to create signal so I will know where to find you. I really hope you got all of this, otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Ichigo stopped listening after the last instruction and was already heading down the huge ladder that led to Urahara's secret training field, and this was a mistake because he had missed Urahara's final instruction. Be careful down there. Whatever attacked the Shoten is still down there and it's strong. Make sure you stay quiet until you get the wristband. Good luck, Mugetsu. Yoruichi is counting on you, even if she doesn't quite know it yet. Scene change. Ichigo had finally reached the bottom of the huge ladder and promised himself that he was going to punch Urahara for making the ladder so damn long. However, thoughts like that were going to have to wait. Something was down here with him. Ichigo didn't know how he knew something was down here, but he just knew so. As carefully and quietly as was possible, Ichigo made his way to the center of the training field. It didn't take long to find the center. Those 10 days he was put through when he was younger defiantly familiarized him with the lay of the land. Ichigo thought he was going to get the wristband without any trouble, but was proven sadly wrong when he felt his side get cut deep. Arg! He screamed in pain as his side began to bleed heavily. His only hope was the wristband now. Not breaking a second, Ichigo ed in a deep breath and pushed the pain as far down as possible and began to run for the wristband that lay on the floor. The pain was almost unbearable, but he manned through it. He had to get the band, otherwise he was dead anyway. If this band doesn't miraculously heal me, I will survive either way. Well then, here's hoping. Urahara thought of everything. Ichigo reached the band and he just knew that whatever was chasing him was right behind him. Needing to be quick, Ichigo managed to roll down and pick up the band, and as he rose he placed it upon his wrist. The result was all Ichigo could hope for. A huge explosion of pitch-black Ryotsu sprouted from the ground and shot off into the sky above, almost reaching the artificial roof that hid this place. And inside that pillar of black Ryotsu was the man who had managed to regain the power to protect. A few seconds passed and the pillar remained. The already huge amount of Ryotsu was still increasing exponentially. Finally, after what seemed life forever, a figure slowly walked out from the pillar and revealed something amazing. Ichigo Kurosaki revealed himself from the pillar and said pillar dissipated, leaving only the form of Ichigo. However, now Ichigo was literally on fire from strange black flames. His feet were shrouded by it and the black fire-like substance consumed his entire lower body, ending at the waist, only reaching up in wisps of the black flame. His upper body was covered in dark gray bandages that covered his entire upper body except from the part of his right arm that the wristband covered. The lower half of his face was also covered by dark gray bandages. His hair was still the same and his eyes were now completely void black with no other color within. It was like staring to nothingness. Ichigo took his time admiring his new self and realized something. I look exactly like I did when I used the final Getsuga Tensho, but I don't feel anywhere near the same strength. I feel as strong as I was after I beat Ulquiorra when I equipped my hollow mask. Who are you? The new voice broke Ichigo from his thoughts and he turned to see something he thought he'd never see again. In front of him was a strange being, a being with a hollow hole, yet had no obvious mask, a hollow with a Zanpakuto. It was an Arrancar, an honest-to-God Arrancar. Ichigo never felt so happy to see any type of hollow before. It worked. I can see spirits again, and I'm coming for you, Yoruichi. Hey, don't ignore me. Ichigo once again looked towards the Arrancar. What is your name, Arrancar? Ichigo was briefly surprised by his voice. It echoed even though he knew there was no echo within the training field. It was even weirder for the Arrancar as when Ichigo spoke, the bandages covering his face didn't budge an inch, as if he hadn't spoken at all. However, the Arrancar regained his composure and gave a smug smile in response. You expect for me to give you my name? Huh? You aren't deserving of hearing my name. Just know that I am here to avenge my Lord Aizen. That was all Ichigo needed to hear. The Arrancar had no chance of dodging the attack that came from Ichigo because the Arrancar couldn't see him move. Ichigo appeared behind the Arrancar and placed his hand on the hollow's back. What followed was the black fire spread onto the hollow's body and caused the hollow to disintegrate within a matter of seconds. Ichigo took a shocked step back. I didn't expect that to happen, I was just going to incapacitate him. Ichigo looked at his hands and felt the power flowing through them, but something was still missing, something on the tip of his tongue, something that he should know how to do but just couldn't. I'm sure you'll figure it out soon enough, but right now we don't have time, you need to find Yoruichi. Ichigo gasped in surprise at the voice within his mind. It was quiet, so quiet that he almost missed what it actually said. That's right. Shouldn't the Senkaimon have opened already? Suddenly a traditional white sliding door appeared in front of Ichigo and he had to chuckle. That was awfully convenient, Urahara, you really do plan for everything. Taking a few hesitant steps, Ichigo stops just before entering the door. He knew that because he had no hell butterfly he was going to have to be quick in case the cleaner is at work or even repaired after Aizen destroyed it. Ichigo took a deep breath in anticipation. Whatever fate may yield to him, there was one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving without Yoruichi, and with that he took his first step through the portal. Ichigo briefly wondered what he was going to do with his graphic novel. It's probably going on hiatus. Don't worry, Ichigo, we'll get her back because nothing can stand against our power, so don't you worry. King, Chap 6. And so, that was that. What did you think? As always, inform me if there is anything that might bother you, or maybe even something you didn't quite get, or simply leave a compliment. I read every single review I get. As always, there's the omake at the bottom for you to enjoy, followed by Chapter 4's alternate ending. Please enjoy. This is Skeletor signing off for this chapter. Nay. Omake. Mugetsu introduces video games to Yoruichi. Come on, I can do this. I know I can do this, and there is no way that I will fail this time. What was that noise? Alert phase, aw crap. Mugetsu shouted as he placed his controller onto the small table to the side. He groaned as he rubbed his eyes. I've been trying to beat this for 2 hours now. This is why I never played video games in the first place. Waste of important time, so why can't I stop playing this? Snake. Snock. What in the world is that noise? Spoke a beautiful familiar voice to Mugetsu, and he turned around to see his love standing in the doorway with a confused expression on her face. Hey Yo-chan, I was trying out this video game, trying to relax. Yoruichi adopted a cheeky smirk as she walked over to Mugetsu and sat herself onto his lap, her chest pressing into his chest. Smirking at Mugetsu's blushing face, she leans in closer to his ear, and Mugetsu puts all of his focus onto hearing what she was going to tell him. Can I have a go? Mugetsu's eloquent reply was as Yoruichi had already turned around, still planted firmly on his lap, and picked up the controller and started playing the game. Mugetsu was left dumbstruck. Did that just happen? That's the sort of crap that happens in cartoons, for God's sake. Mission complete. Good job, Snake. Wait, what? Mugetsu maneuvered his head so he could see the screen and let his jaw drop when he saw the completion screen on TV. That wasn't so hard, that or you just Mew-kun. Yoruichi once again turned around on his lap and looked smugly into Mugetsu's eyes. Oh, shut up, you tease. Mugetsu said as he became captivated within his lover's golden eyes. Yoruichi likewise stared deeply into Mugetsu's eyes and lowered her mouth slightly, and Mugetsu raised his towards her. They were so close now, an inch away from kissing. I'm only a tease for you, Mew-kun. Only for my Mew-kun. Their lips connected and thus proved that video games are good for relationships. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.